Good evening, I'm Faye Kwan and these are our top stories for tonight. Venezuela's opposition leader presents her Nobel Peace Prize medal to US President Donald Trump. And European troops arrive in Greenland as tensions grow over US pressures on the Arctic island. All that and more coming up on AWANI International. Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado has presented her Nobel Peace Prize medal to US President Donald Trump during a White House meeting. The meeting marked the first encounter between Trump and Machado, who is seeking a role in Venezuela following the capture of Nicolás Maduro. The White House confirmed that Trump intends to keep the medal, which Machado described as a symbol of gratitude for what she called his commitment to the freedom of the Venezuelan people. In a post on Truth Social, Trump called the move a gesture of mutual respect. He has long sought the Nobel Peace Prize and has repeatedly argued he deserved it for diplomatic efforts. He has previously expressed frustration at being overlooked and publicly campaigned for the award. However, under Nobel rules, the honor remains with Machado and cannot be transferred, shared or revoked. Trump has previously dismissed the idea of having Machado as Venezuela's leader, saying she lacks sufficient support inside the country. The visit comes amid ongoing uncertainty over Venezuela's governance, as interim president Delcy Rodriguez consolidates power and calls for diplomacy with the US. European countries have begun sending small numbers of troops to Greenland, as Denmark pushes ahead with plans for a larger and more permanent NATO presence on the Arctic island. The deployments are modest and focused on preparing joint military exercises, but they carry political weight, coming a day after talks between the US, Denmark and Greenland failed to ease tensions. On Thursday, French troops have arrived in the capital of Nuuk, with Germany, Sweden, Norway, Finland and the Netherlands and also the UK involved. France says more land, air and sea assets will follow. Now, US President Donald Trump continues to press his claim to Greenland, which is a semi-autonomous part of Denmark, and has not ruled out taking it by force. The White House said European troops in Greenland will not stop Trump from pursuing his goal to take the island. Denmark and Greenland have rejected Trump's threats, saying Greenland is not for sale. As European troops arrive in Greenland to strengthen its NATO presence on the Arctic island, experts say the deployments are twofold: to demonstrate its commitment to Arctic security and to subtly signal to the US that Greenland is not undefended.
The military increase we see in Greenland today and yesterday is very much about strategic communication, and the audience here is the Americans, and there are two messages to send to the Americans. One is to deter, is to show that if you decide to do something militarily, we're ready to defend Greenland. And the other purpose is to say, well, you take your critique seriously. We increase our presence and take care of our sovereignty and improve surveillance over Greenland.
The situation also raises questions about NATO itself, with one of its key members threatening the territory of a fellow ally.
This is a big test for NATO because you've basically got one member of NATO, the United States, the superpower that's meant to guarantee the security of everybody else, threatening to take over the territory of a fellow NATO ally. So that puts the kind of fundamental principle of NATO in question, because it's meant to be a security alliance where everybody has everybody else's back, and the US, above all, as the superpower, is the ultimate security guarantee. Diplomats still think that the scenario of a US military takeover of Greenland is very unlikely, but given that the US hasn't ruled it out, they have to take it seriously to an extent, and this is obviously the big fear, that ultimately the US provides the nuclear umbrella, the ultimate protection for European allies. If NATO disintegrates, that's no longer there.
Those are the headlines for tonight. More news coming up shortly after the break.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda, tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada.
Welcome back. Taiwan says it wants to become a close strategic partner with the U.S. in artificial intelligence, following a new trade deal that cuts tariffs and unlocks tech investments. Speaking in Washington, Vice Premier Cheng Li-chun said the agreement would strengthen supply chain cooperation without restraining Taiwan's domestic technology growth.
The agreement comes as Washington pushes key semiconductor producers to expand chip and AI production on U.S. soil. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said Taiwan-based firms would invest up to $250 billion in semiconductors, energy, and AI in the U.S. The figure includes $100 billion already committed by chip giant TSMC, with additional investment expected in the coming years. Taiwan officials said investments would extend beyond chips to AI servers and energy infrastructure, with decisions led by companies rather than the government. The agreement, however, will still require validation by Taiwan's parliament, where some lawmakers have raised concerns about over-dependence on the U.S. market. The deal has drawn attention from Beijing, which opposes deepening Taiwan-U.S. ties and claims the island as its own territory, a claim Taipei repeatedly rejects.
Canada says it will remove the 100% tariff previously imposed on Chinese electric vehicle imports. Instead, Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada will cap import volumes and apply a standard tariff rate of 6.1% to shipments within the 49,000 unit limit. Following a meeting with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping today, Carney announced that Canada expects China to lower tariffs on Canadian canola seed to around 15% by March 1st. He added that Canadian peas, lobsters and crabs will not be subject to discrimination tariffs from March until at least the end of the year. Carney outlined 5 key areas in the new Canada-China strategic partnership, from clean energy to a commitment on multilateralism. He reaffirmed Canada's recognition of the One China policy, acknowledging there is only one Chinese government. This 4-day state visit is the first by a Canadian Prime Minister since relations soured in 2018, which led to retaliatory measures by Beijing. In other news, U.S. President Donald Trump says he is backing a new Palestinian technocratic government to run Gaza. The transitional body will operate under the oversight of the International Board of Peace, which he says he will chair. The announcement comes as Washington moves to implement a second phase of a fragile ceasefire between Hamas and Israel.
The Board of Peace will be headed by former UN Middle East envoy Nikolai Mladenov. Last week, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed Mladenov's appointment, saying he will serve as the international envoy overseeing Gaza's transitional governance. Mediators from Egypt, Qatar and Turkey say the Palestinian technocratic body will have 15 members and be led by Ali Shath, a former Palestinian Authority official. However, some analysts have criticized the plan, warning that U.S. leadership of the new transitional Palestinian government risks resembling a colonial-style setup. The plan is part of a ceasefire agreed by Hamas and Israel in October, but the truce remains fragile. Israel continues to attack Gaza. Since October, more than 440 Palestinians, including over 100 children, have been killed. Millions still remain displaced.
The United Nations Security Council has held an emergency meeting to discuss deadly protests in Iran amid threats by the U.S. to use military force to intervene. Iran's deputy representative to the UN warned the Council that Tehran does not seek confrontation but would respond to any U.S. aggression.
The protests, which began in late December, were fueled by soaring inflation and the collapse of the national currency. Thousands have been reportedly killed, injured and detained in violent crackdowns by Iranian authorities. The UN has called for independent investigations into all killings and warned against the possible use of the death penalty against protesters. On Wednesday, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi rejected reports that Tehran planned to execute anti-government protesters. US President Donald Trump, which had earlier threatened to strike Iran, has also adopted a wait-and-see approach, saying he had been told the killings were easing and that he believed there was no current plan for civilian executions. The US ambassador to the UN, however, said all options remain on the table to stop the crackdown on protesters.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump is threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act in Minnesota, a rarely used 19th century law that will allow active duty military personnel to be deployed for domestic law enforcement duties. He is threatening the move amid unrest over federal immigration enforcement operations there.
Trump warned on social media that he would use the law if Minnesota officials failed to stop what he called professional agitators and insurrectionists. The threat comes after escalating protests in Minneapolis following the fatal shooting of 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good by an immigration and customs enforcement officer. The incident sparked demonstrations and clashes with federal agents, and a separate shooting involving a Venezuelan national has added to tensions. Clashes broke out between protesters and law enforcement near the scene of the shooting on Wednesday night, with officers hit by fireworks, ice and snowballs. The Insurrection Act, dating back to 1807, has not been used without state consent in over 6 decades and grants the president broad authority to deploy military forces in domestic unrest.
South Korea's former President Yoon Suk-yeol has been sentenced to 5 years in jail in the first of 4 trials linked to his 2024 martial law decree. He was found guilty of abuse of power, falsifying documents, and obstructing justice. The court found Yoon used his bodyguards to block his arrest and did not consult his full cabinet before declaring martial law. He also created and then destroyed a false document claiming approval from the Prime Minister and Defence Minister. A judge said Yoon's actions had plunged the country into political crisis, noting that he had consistently showed no remorse. Prosecutors accused him of using state institutions to cover up wrongdoing and bypass constitutional checks. In January last year, around 3,000 police officers were deployed over 2 attempts to take Yoon into custody for questioning over insurrection charges. He is facing 3 other trials. The most serious charge is insurrection, for which prosecutors are seeking the death penalty. A verdict in that case is expected in February. TikTok will begin rolling out new age detection technology across Europe in the coming weeks. The move comes as the platform faces pressure from regulators to better identify and remove accounts belonging to children under 13. The system, previously unreported, follows a year-long pilot in Europe. TikTok told Reuters it was built specifically for Europe to meet the region's regulatory requirements. The technology analyzes posted content and behavioral signals to predict if an account may belong to an underage user. Accounts flagged will then be reviewed by specialist moderators rather than automatically banned. European authorities are increasingly scrutinizing how platforms verify users' ages under strict data protection rules, amid concerns that current methods are ineffective. Australia last year imposed the world's first social media ban on users under 16, while the European Parliament is pushing for age limits on social media platforms. That concludes AWANI International for tonight. Stay with us as we track the strategies and power shifts shaping the new global order. For more updates, visit international.astroawani.com and follow us on social media. I'm Faye Kwan. Thank you for watching and good night.